All right. Well, welcome again to another edition of My View from the Pew. I'm Randy Blaukat, and as always, appreciate you stopping by the channel. So, continue to grow in our numbers. So, I'm thankful for that. So, please feel free to subscribe or like on any of the videos, and would love your comments on kind of what topics you may want to hear on the podcast or on the video on the YouTube channel, or whatever we're calling it. So, as I mentioned earlier, a special guest is in the house, and as you can't tell from looking at him, we might be related. But my cousin Randy Blaukat. Randy is a professional fisherman and has been for 40 plus years, probably. Randy, is that about right?
Probably, yeah, close
In
to
that
it. Yeah,
in that
yeah.
range. Um, so Randy's dad and my dad were brothers. Um, and so if you've seen kind of a trivia, if you've seen the house where Randy's done some videos, I think he had one where all the trees were down and a few other things at his folks' house. That's actually the same house my dad grew up in as well. I don't know if he was born in that house or were they born in that house, Randy? Or
They
can't remember when
now
they moved there.
your dad may have been, but dad he no, I think that they moved in there when he was like 5 or 6 years old or something.
Okay, all right. So I knew they
So,
grew up basically in that house, and kind of when that was probably the only house out there for miles
yeah.
around. But if you see that house, that's kind of where my dad grew up as well. So, but anyway, so one of the things that I was talking to someone the other day is that the old saying, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And so I think Randy has perfected that to some extent with fishing. But we also know that I do real estate as well, and people say, "Well, I'd love to be a realtor. I love looking at houses." It has nothing to do with looking at houses, and I'm sure the same thing, Randy, you get all the time of, yeah, professional fisherman. I would love that. I love to fish all day, and that's probably the last thing you're doing all day is fishing. You got everything else. So I thought maybe we'd just take a few minutes and just kind of tell us, Randy, how you kind of got started. What made you go into the career and kind of how it's evolved over the years.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Just what you said there. I don't know how many times I've heard of that. Oh, it must be nice to fish for a living, and it's like, yeah, here's professional fishing in a nutshell that people don't realize. First of all, you pay an entry fee, anywhere between $1,000 to $5,000 per tournament. And then you're away from home, 1,000 miles away from home for a week, spending all the money on lodging and gas. And if you don't win anything, it's like, you've lost a ton of money. So, I mean, and your work days on professional fishing, it's like 3:30 in the morning until 11 o'clock at night. So how many times do you work, like 80 hours a week and not get paid for it, which you do sometimes in pro fishing. So yeah, there's a lot of stress that goes with it. But I don't know how I got started in it. It's like, just like you said, where, our dads, they grew up in that house there, and there's a little, you know where Turkey Creek is at the bottom
Yep.
of the hill there. That's where I started at, just wading that creek when I was a kid, just coming home after school and wading the creek. And then I learned how to, fish a little bit when I got like in grade school. And that got me loving to fish, and then I started sneaking into farm ponds around the house there. And I don't know if you remember, like, you guys that are watching this video probably don't know, but there's right down from, our house there was like a huge farm pond that guys have behind a fence. And I used to sneak in there when I was a little kid. I'd climb that fence at night and sneak in there and catch them. And, that's where my love for fishing started. And then as I got into high school, I started following tournaments, in the magazines like in Bassmaster. And I just love fishing. It's like, man, that's what I wanted to do. I just wanted to be a pro fisherman. Of course, my mom and dad, it's like back then, back in the late 70s and early 80s, that wasn't really a thing, being a pro fisherman. So they're like, Randy, you need to be doing something where you have some job security and get, all that type of deal. And so I pushed forward and started doing it. And I think I started out fishing small tournaments, sort of like, somebody would start in Little League Baseball and work up to the majors. And in 1985, and the 1985-86 season that was my first season on the Bassmaster Tour, which was the professional tour back then, and was fortunate enough to qualify for what they call the Bassmaster Classic, which is their year-end championship. 22 years old, and that got me some sponsors, and that kept me in the sport because it was so expensive at that time. So I got real fortunate, to qualify for that classic my first year. And then
So
every
not to interrupt
year.
you, Randy, but just kind of curiosity, is that kind of the progression? Just the sponsors look at who's done well at tournaments and then come up to you? Or I know a lot of people are. I know it's a it's a progression to get the sponsors. I'm sure that I know at one time, I don't know if you and I kid around about it, but I know you guys with your jackets looks like
Yeah.
NASCAR jackets because you got all these little patches for a sponsor here and there. But is that kind of the progression? Is that they look and see who's doing well in some of the local tournaments and who might be the next Randy
Yeah,
Blaukat?
well, that's the way it used to be before social media. I'll get into that, the social media influence here in a little bit, but yeah, that's what it was. And there's a lot of different circuits as far as, like regional circuits, local circuits, and then national circuits. And the companies that sponsor anglers are really only concerned about the national circuit, which was the Bassmaster circuit at that time. And if you qualified for the year-end championship, you got a lot of notoriety out of it. You got magazines articles about you. That was like the world championship of fishing, and that's when you could either approach a sponsor or they would approach you to try to endorse their products. I mean, one of the first sponsors I had was Ranger Boat Company. After I qualified for that classic, they called me up and wanted to know if they could pay my entry fees if I wanted to be sponsored by Ranger, which was a big deal because entry fees are probably one of the biggest expenses of an angler's, and that's sort of how sponsors unfold in terms of you achieve some level of success, and then you either solicit the sponsor or they come to you um, from that end on it. But ultimately, like I said, you can't worry about the sponsorship end of it because you got to perform before you can get the sponsorship. So you just sort of have to focus on your fishing and getting back to like doing something that you love, like what you're talking about. It's like you you have to love it. Like anything like this that demands that you're your own boss. I mean, you have to love what you're doing because you're the only one that's going to push yourself. And you have to be willing to realize that you don't get in it for the money, because if you're in it for the money on this end, it's like you're never going to be successful. That passion and that desire for the sport has got to be the overwhelming influence. And some people either have that or they don't. And most people that are on that upper level of professional fishing, that's the common thread that they have with it.
And then once you kind of start rolling and you get more and more sponsors, I'm assuming it's a balancing act of fishing, and then I'm sure the sponsors want you to, either appearances or now with social media, I'm sure it's videos on this or that or pushing their product and things of that nature. So that's probably not that takes a lot of your time as well.
Yeah, that it's changed because from like, when I started back in the mid 80s up until about, 2017 or 2018, the only thing that companies cared about was like the your performance, how well you did in tournaments. And that's then and but the problem you had with that is like you got a really finite amount of sponsorship dollars within the industry, so you got a very small percentage of those anglers that are hogging up most of the sponsorship dollars. Financial sponsorship, I'm talking about monthly retainers and stuff. And then you have the rest where some anglers, they call themselves sponsored, but they might be getting some free plastic worms or a discount on some tackle, which is not really a sponsorship. I'm talking about getting paid to fish and to represent these companies. So that stayed intact pretty much until, like I said, about 2018, 19. And then once social media really started coming on the scene in terms of like, Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and YouTube, the number of people that an angler could reach if they had a social media platform was 20 times greater than what you could reach if you did good in a tournament. So there's been a shift over the past 5 or 6 years, a dramatic shift to where the companies, they don't really care much about your tournament performance. They want to know how many impressions you get a month through your social media, how many watch hours. That's what's value to them. So it's been a huge metamorphosis in how people are able to generate and make a living in the sport. So I don't know if I like that or much because it doesn't, before, your performance was rewarded and your art form of fishing was rewarded. And that's not really the case anymore. That's sort of the evolution that's came with social media.
Yeah, so really professional fishermen are professional social media guys, really
Yeah.
more to some extent, right?
Yeah, I had a friend of mine that was he's sponsored by Bass Pro Shop, and they have like an annual meeting and everything, like a pro staff meeting, and the marketing manager for Bass Pro Shop said now these are professional fishermen in the meeting. They said, and as far as we're concerned, you guys are not professional fishermen. You're just fishermen. You're just social media influencers that happen to fish
Wow.
because they realize the power of that now. So that's completely different than it's ever been.
Yeah, so really, if you were to start now, it would be completely different than when you started. It's
Oh
kind of
yeah, it's
completely flipped. So, and I know with you, and you've got a great YouTube channel called Intuitive Angling. I'll put the link in the description here, which you talk about, a lot of different things in the sport as well as the things you've done, but also, the thing which you probably don't get on a lot of them is you're giving tips and tricks that you've learned over your 40 plus career
mhm.
that have to do with fishing, which is
Yeah,
probably what makes your channel pretty popular. Is that you probably don't get that as much anymore, but you're actually giving the tips, and you've been able to kind of expand it where you're doing lessons on the water and maps of the. So it's really your progression, as you mentioned, is kind of more the social media, but you've kind of taken it almost like the wise teacher at this point in time in your career. Would that be accurate?
yeah. It's fishermen. They used to be notorious for being quiet, keeping secrets. They didn't want to tell you anything. That's the way it
Right.
was forever. But now, since they came out over the past 10 years with like live television coverage of the tournaments and again all the YouTube stuff, you can't hide anything. So people it's like anglers now it doesn't even do them any good to try to hide what they're doing because you can see it and if they try to hide it or try to say something that's not they're going to get proven wrong. So in my situation, I was one of those anglers that I worked so hard to like develop techniques and different type of strategies in fishing that worked, and it took me decades to do it. I was very protective of it, and I didn't share that because I had to put so much of my own dirt time in to figure that out. But now, with YouTube, it's worth it to do that. I mean, you can act, it's the sharing that information is more valuable than actually keeping it to yourself for the tournaments now. So that's why I've sort of been, going that road on my channel, just giving away all the tips I've learned and tricks for the past 50 years.
So now, as you and I both have gray in our hair on our careers, do you find that you enjoy that part of it more now than the fishing part, or is it 50-50, or how has
Oh,
that
I
evolved?
I definitely enjoy the YouTube part of it more because I can be home. It's like that. One of the biggest drawbacks that I've done for 30 years is I was gone almost half the year traveling. I mean, because our tournaments were coast to coast. So, and most of them you'd be gone away from home from, for nine days to 14 days per tournament. So that burns you out. It's like if there's one drawback of it, it's like traveling and staying in strange places and driving through cities all across the country. And I just sort of fish locally and regionally in tournaments. I don't, everything's within an hour or two drive of my house, so I don't have to do that. So, but no, I like it because it's a creative outlet, and it's a way to sort of give back and help people catch more fish, and sort of it's been a really good transition, out of fishing a little bit, out of competitive fishing.
No, no, and if you got again, we'll put the link in the description. But if you guys haven't had a chance to look at them, it's really good information. Really good information on what's going on in the industry as a whole. I've been with 40 plus years of seeing how it's evolved. Randy's got a lot of good information on that. So definitely, worth looking at and signing up if you're in the Springfield area. I guess you do the on lake stuff in Table Rock. Is that where you
Yeah,
mainly do that, or Grand, or?
most of those lessons I do are on Table Rock or Stockton, and
Yeah.
people if they want to learn a specific technique, I take them out and show them how to do that, and it's been pretty fun too with that.
Yeah. But I think it is true. I mean, as you can tell, I think from Randy is just passionate, and if you watch his videos, you'll see that is that if you find something you love doing, you never work a day in your life. Although I think Randy would say that it's a lot of work to do it, but it's fun work when you're doing that. So
Well,
And
that's the
strangely
thing
enough,
about it. It's
yeah, go
it's
ahead.
like, I mean, that's the thing. It's like that's what I try to tell people. It's like, man, if you can do something that you don't consider work, even if you don't make as much money in it, it's worth it. Because
Yeah,
I would rather do something that I really love and not make as much money as rather than dragging myself into work, hating what I do, making more money. So it's like a sort of like a balancing act there a little bit.
exactly. Yeah, and again, you've been able to in the latter end of your career here is really share that knowledge with other people and kind of what they're doing. So I think it is true. Again, if you can find what you love, you never work a day in your life. So certainly appreciate visiting with you, Randy. We'll put the descriptions on there. But you know, this is part of what I want to do with the channel is just talk to interesting people and kind of what they're doing. And Randy's one of those people. So anyway, I appreciate you stopping by today. That's my view from the pew.